Welcome, everybody, to the Happy Cynics with Dr. K and iDog. And today we're going to kind of follow up on a topic that came up in our earlier episodes. And we thought maybe we'd just kind of pause and maybe do something like this once in a while. This isn't going to be anything technical, but we want to talk about belief formation. I mean, how do we form our beliefs? Why do we hold the beliefs that we do? Because a lot of discussion, let's put it this way, debate doesn't really accomplish anything except for perhaps people that haven't yet made up their minds. But once somebody makes up his or her mind, it's very difficult to get them to reconsider what it is they think. And that's because it's not just a strictly logical process, in spite of what the Vulcans and Mr. Spock tell us in the Star Trek enterprise, in the whole franchise. The notion that somehow we should all be like computers and, you know, try to not have any feelings, that's just impossible, to be honest with you. And it doesn't even make sense, because our whole power of choice comes from desire. And these desires go back to biological drives, which even I think are probably driven by even chemical properties and other things. If you want to be reductionistic here for just a second. Go ahead.
So I wanted to go back and ask you a quick question about the debate thing.
Yes.
So if you can't change someone's mind with a debate, is there still a purpose to debate?
Oh, I think
there's probably an argument to be made that debate is not so much about changing the other person's mind, but in forming a new understanding by taking into account new insights.
I think so. I mean, I'd like to think, and I do believe, that there are people who are open-minded and are willing to reconsider their own positions and to consider other points of view. But I guess maybe I overstated it a bit. The thing is, we're a mixture, feelings and thoughts or reasons. So let's say logic and feeling. Logic and feeling are intertwined, and they can't be separated. This is why whenever people are worried about AI, and I do think that there are real dangers about artificial intelligence, but I'm not sure how real they are. But right now, at least at the present, computers only make choices based on what the programmer puts into the whole system. And so I guess what I want to say, and I'm kind of straying off topic here, so let me keep focused on your question. I do think debates serve a purpose for the undecided people. I think debates are intended to sway them to one side or the other. That may seem like a trivial thing, but polling data in the United States, at least, shows that a lot of people don't even make up their minds until like right at the last minute. Our whole nature of procrastination. A lot of people, they won't do the homework, but they may sit and listen to a debate and then try to decide for themselves which way they're going to vote. So debates on issues, I do think, have a purpose for a lot of people, because a lot of people aren't going to naturally try to understand more than one point of view. So I'm hoping that there are a fair number of people who are open to considering different points of view. But I guess what I want to say is there's a certain number of people, and even I think all of us in certain areas of our lives, we have to commit to something. And once you commit to something, you become emotionally invested in it. And so once you become emotionally invested in it, it's no longer just a matter of logic and evidence and all of that. You have to deal with the psychological, sociological part of it as well.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that, like, in a academic debate, you know, say like something that's sponsored by a university,
Right.
I think
right.
part of what the purpose of that is for people to come and hear these two different viewpoints and watch two academics work out in real time what the weaknesses are in their own arguments.
Yeah, and
by listening to criticism.
I think that debates work better in an academic setting. And the reason I say that, let's put it this way. Debates are probably not going to sway the professors. They sway the students. Why? Because students are just at the cusp of adulthood. And so they're thinking about issues that are going to affect their lives or may affect their lives. But yet they're not emotionally invested in one side or the other. What we want to drive at here a little bit today, kind of unpack this a little bit. So what's going on in belief formation? Well, I'm going to come right back to where we started before, and it all starts with pattern recognition. I mean, it's all about seeing patterns in things. I mean, this is what language is. You go to a different country or where everybody's speaking a different language. If you immerse yourself in the language, you're basically looking for patterns. Patterns, certain sounds that you associate with certain actions or certain objects. Our grandson is, I think he's about 16 months old. So we were watching him here a week or so ago. And I think I've mentioned, you may have even seen this, but I've got a pretty vast DVD collection of old TV shows.
Yeah.
Not so
classic
much
sitcoms.
Yes, classic sitcoms, but even like dramas and such. So like I have the old Equalizer with Edward Woodward and, you know, the Untouchables, and I mean, all the way across the gamut. Well, one of the ones that sits out front is the 60s Batman with Adam West and Burt Ward. So Simon was walking over looking at DVDs, and he was going to, his big thing is it looks, if I can pull it down, I like to watch it fall and hit the ground. So I didn't want him ripping it because I have them all alphabetized. I didn't want him pulling them all off the shelves. But so I tried to distract him by singing the Batman theme and pointing at Batman. So every time I'd sing Batman, da-da-na-na-na-na-na, Batman. Every time I'd say Batman, I'd poke Batman with my finger twice. Batman, while I'm, singing. Well, he just kind of stood, I was holding him. He just kind of looked and watched what I was doing. Well, after that was done, I went back to my bedroom to the computer and started working again. Amy said a little bit later, he walked up to the Batman DVD and was poking it twice, like the same timing and pattern like I was doing with the song. And it's just really amazing to watch his little mind. And really, he's looking for patterns. He's looking for patterns and things that make sense of his world. And this is where our beliefs come from. Okay. We're essentially just making judgments about how this relates to that.
I think the language as an illustration of early like belief formation is fairly interesting, because I would want to drive a wedge between two ideas in language. That is, communication is like one aspect of language, and that's like more tied to the pattern recognition of like, this is what this thing is called.
Right.
But I think there's
I'm not
I'm
not strictly advocating what's known, for those of you who are more technical with this stuff, a referential view of language. I'm not
the objective view of language.
Yes, I'm not trying to push that entirely, but I do think that that's an aspect of it. Go ahead.
It's certainly, I'm not pushing back against that at all. Although I would to a degree. But that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But I think communication can happen even at like the animal instinctual level, that like certain
Sure.
vocalizations refer to certain things.
Sure. I mean, all kinds of animals
language-
have mating calls and warning calls, like when there's danger. Go ahead.
Right. So language, and I think this is also true of beliefs, language is really separated from communication in that language allows you to miscommunicate, right? Language introduces this ability to be misunderstood,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying this one thing, but it doesn't really mean, it's not referential, right? And I think that there's an element of that in belief as well, that there's a parallel structure between language and belief of beliefs sometimes hide the truth behind them, behind what they're stating, that there's a miscommunication in belief.
Yeah. Okay. I know what you're saying. I would probably characterize that as a misinterpretation as opposed to a miscommunication, but like a misinterpretation of reality.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is like there's a gap between a system of belief and like what Freud would call the real.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So like that's kind of the gap I'm pointing to, is like there's the real, the thing signified, and the belief, and there's some separation between these two things.
Yeah.
And language reflects that as well. So that's just an element of human belief that I think is worth exploring in this episode.
Yes. So this goes back to even Socrates, and then a fellow who picked up on this in the 19th century was Kierkegaard, who did his doctoral dissertation on Socrates and his use of irony. But Kierkegaard talked about this, about how we are always approximating truth. Okay? So we're observing reality, but then we are interpreting what we believe that's going on. And again, patterns, but in other words, what is it that's causing what? How are these things related? And this is why you can get 6 people who all witness a traffic accident, and they may have slightly different interpretations, although chances are they're going to be, when you come down to just plain phenomena, okay, just interpret a sound like a screech, the screech of a brakes, or a scream, somebody screaming. Those are things that are less likely to be misinterpreted.
Yeah, I think the gap of like the miscommunication really only appears or shows that it's evident when you have a system of beliefs, not individual beliefs themselves.
Well, yeah. So there are what we could call, say, more like basic foundational type beliefs. And then there are more interpretive beliefs. So let's use the court system again as a good illustration. So this is why in our court system, when people testify, they don't want the witnesses interpreting what they witnessed. They want them to just recount. I saw this. I heard this. This is what I encountered, but not interpreting what do you think happened. That's supposed to be left for the jury. Now, the lawyers are trying to plant different theories in the minds of the jurors as to how to interpret this testimony. Again, that's what's kind of going on. So this is what, and I don't want to get off topic here, but see, this is where I talk about this with students. So let's say even in different disciplines of knowledge that we have. So even say university students taking different types of classes. If you say, okay, here's the thing, as you start to generalize more and more, okay, so we start with specific instances of things that we observe, and then we interpret those. And then we have those kind of lower level beliefs that we relate to each other with then bigger, like higher level beliefs. Well, you get all the way up to the top, you end up, say, like in the realm of philosophy, religion, theology.
Yeah. The higher you go, the more abstract generally.
Exactly. So these are the things that end up being the most important because they are trying to interpret everything, all of your experiences in one coherent system. But this is where people have to realize the more important that and the higher level of belief that you get to, the less certain you can be of that. This is why, I mean, how many philosophies, how many religions are there in the world? I mean, even most of us as individuals can't strictly commit to just one way of thinking, or at least let's say it this way. Even if we commit to one way of thinking, we at least are able to recognize that there's more than one way of framing this. Like if I grew up in a different part of the world, I would probably be interpreting my life experiences in a different paradigm. And so it's like you could say, well, you could take like philosophy and religion, and then you can express them in terms of, say, sociology. You could take sociology and you can express that in terms of psychology. And then you could express psychology in terms of biology, biology in terms of chemistry, chemistry in terms of physics. And then physics, basically now you're back to empirical observation and logic, quantitative, qualitative
you
logic.
You could make the argument that you end up with just pure math at the end.
Yeah, I'd say pure logic. So I'm referring to math as quantitative logic. So this has to do with quantities, but then we also, of course, have qualitative logic, like Aristotle tried to work out with the syllogism. So something cannot simultaneously be A and not A. At least that's a Western understanding, yes.
For people who have never taken a formal class in logic, there is like a mathematical system by which you work out how logic works. Like, I remember you taught me logic, and it was maybe the driest class I ever took.
Yeah, it is.
But it was extremely fun because I like physics and chemistry and working out equations. So like all of a sudden I got to do that in philosophy too, and I found it fascinating. But there is like a strict, rigid system for how logic works that is, I think, equivalent to mathematics.
Now that you brought up logic, I just want to very quickly address a common misconception about logic. Logic is not necessarily something that's external to us. Logic, it just has to do with the rules of reasoning as to how we make sense of things. When we say that something's illogical, what that means is you are embracing contradictory beliefs. You are basically taking clashing interpretations of your experiences and trying to hold two different views that cannot both possibly be true at the same time. That's really all that there is in being a logical person. Being a logical person means that you're consistent. You have coherent beliefs. They fit together and reinforce one another. And a lot of this just kind of can come from common sense. It just depends on, again, how complex the beliefs are as to so the more complicated the beliefs get, the more complicated your thinking has to get to make sure that there aren't contradictions. But that's really what logic is about. Sometimes people have all kinds of excuses for not caring about being logical. I mean, the notion of being strictly logical like Mr. Spock, that just isn't even realistic. Because, just go back to the whole courtroom illustration. I mean, how many, if people witness a crime or they witness an accident or something, I mean, how often is it that the evidence is so strong that there can only be one possible interpretation? There's always room for reinterpreting things. So it's like if we discover, some ancient burial site in an archaeological dig, well, how many different interpretations could that maybe have? Basically, the only thing that would really guide that would be if there are similarities or differences between that find and things that have been found in other places at other times. So really, in terms of common sense here, folks, we're just talking about being consistent, not trying to hold beliefs that don't fit together. Now, I'm not trying to pick on Christianity or religion, but I'll give you an example, something I've encountered a lot with a lot of my students. They want to, there are a lot of people that believe that everything that happens for a reason, that God is like micromanaging the world and that everything that happens is a part of God's plan. And yet they still hold the belief that God gives them the freedom to create their own destiny. Now that at some level, that's contradictory. So if God is giving each person the ability to craft and form their own destiny, well, then God is not determining what's going to happen. You can't say that God is determining what's going to happen and God's not determining what's going to happen simultaneously. But a lot of people don't want to be challenged because they find some kind of utility in those beliefs, even though they're contradictory. Which brings me back to really what I want to talk about here a good bit, and that is the social, psychological aspects of our beliefs.
Yeah, I just want to add that the utility of non-logical beliefs. I don't want to say illogical because the people who would hold those beliefs would say, well, logic is not necessary for this type of belief. I think they don't really understand what that would mean. I'm not saying that they're not intelligent.
No, but I would say this. When people hold beliefs that, and I will use the word illogical, what I mean by illogical is that they are contradictory beliefs. These beliefs both can't be true in the way that people are embracing them. And really what people are doing, it doesn't make them not intelligent, but what they are doing is even rejecting their own intelligence.
To go back to we were kind of talking about an Aristotelian inductive kind of shape of epistemology, where we're starting at these basic observations and labeling categories, and that kind of brings us back into language.
Right.
That these categories get higher and higher and more abstract and static, and they kind of form this web of systems through which we see the world, right? There's a biological system, there's a physics system, there's all these different things that form this web of like this tower towards the one, truth.
Yes. Okay.
I think that's in a strictly like analytical philosophy, that's all there is. But I think it would be helpful for us to start in a more dynamic, maybe continental place of behind that web, in the gaps in that web, there is real. The real is in those gaps. But you can only see the real through those gaps. Does that make sense? So you can't do away with the system.
Yes.
But those gaps in the system point to what truth really is.
All right.
The system doesn't point to truth.
Okay, so let me kind of frame it this way. So when we went into the realm of quantum mechanics in the 20th century, there were people like Einstein with his theory of relativity and others who started saying, well, Newtonian mechanics, like Isaac Newton's way of viewing the world with his laws of motion and all of that, breaks down at a certain point. Okay, it does. It breaks down at a certain point. And so okay, so here's kind of the thing. And this is kind of, I'm going to try to kind of, I don't know if I'm necessarily pushing back against what you're saying, but okay, so here's the thing. There's a certain relativity or randomness at a quantum level. At least that's how we interpret it right now. Now, whether that ends up being some other kind of more complicated mechanics at a very minute level or at very big levels, I don't know. But here's the thing. We know that once you start getting closer and closer to the speed of light, or at least this is the theory. I don't know. We've been able to travel near the speed of light yet. Nobody's come up with the warp engine yet. So we even if it's true that Newton's laws start to break down when you get at really high speeds or whenever you get at a very minute level. So either at a very vast level, and that's on that side of our observation, or at a very small level on that side of our observation, that doesn't destroy the reliability of Newton's laws of motion in our typical realm of our typical frame of reference. So this is kind of what I'm saying. And so I would say that what you're arguing would be a qualifier, but I have encountered people that they will take like the fact that there's a certain quantum randomness in things and then want to somehow extrapolate that randomness as though if you drop a bowling ball off a building every millionth time, it's going to go up in the air instead of go down. I mean, there's no any kind of evidence that would suggest that no matter how many billions of times you drop a bowling ball off a building, it's still going to go down. It's still going to go to the earth. And so let's put it this way. I think those kind of dualisms are somewhat peripheral. They're kind of on the boundaries of what we're able to observe. There may very well be, let me frame it this way. Just even in simpler terms, in everyday religion, a spiritual realm versus a material realm. There's no way of proving or disproving a spiritual realm. I mean, there are, and usually where do people tend to insert that dualism? On the periphery of what they can understand. So ancient people who had very little scientific understanding saw a lot of things as being some kind of a spiritual manifestation. Somebody has convulsions. Well, they must be demon possessed. Somebody's born blind. Well, God must be punishing them for somebody else's sin. Okay.
So
go ahead.
I think I've stumbled upon a better language for what I'm trying to get at.
Okay.
Because when I say the gaps in the web, the gaps in the structure here, I don't mean like the peripheries of where we no longer understand. The gap that I'm referring to is the gap of logic. Where you can find in that system that it is it conflicts with itself. It is internally incoherent. That is where we start to see past the system and say like, oh, well, this doesn't explain this. This can't follow from this. And so we can get closer to the real. And I think what I'm really trying to say is what Thomas Kuhn is trying to get at in Structure of Scientific Revolutions, that as a system of science no longer explains new phenomena, we get a new system born out of that, and people start flocking away from the former theories to a new theory that is closer to reality, but tends towards more complexity.
Okay, so let's discuss Kuhn and the and the whole thing with scientific revolutions. So let me give a quick overview of this. So in the early 1960s, a guy named Thomas Kuhn wrote this book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And he's the one, as far as I know, coined the phrase, or at least he popularized it, the term paradigm. So a paradigm is essentially like a scientific model, okay? It's a way of viewing the world. You could call it a worldview, but it has to do with, say, like a model, how things work. So, like, one example that's used in the book would be like the transition from what they called the plum pudding model of the atom to Niels Bohr's model of the atom. So back before the time of Thomas Rutherford in his experiments is one who was able to debunk the plum pudding model of the atom. So here's what that was. People knew that there were atoms and that atoms had both positive and negative charges inside them, which we call protons and electrons. Okay? Going back to your basic high school science here. Well, before the time of Thomas Rutherford, they thought that these positive and negatives must just be kind of like freely floating with all around the atom. They're just kind of interspersed like plum pudding. So plum pudding, you know, it's got like the raisins and nuts or whatever it's got in it. I don't know. I've never eaten plum pudding, but it's just kind of all in there. Okay. Well, then what Rutherford showed was when you send like a particle beam into the atom, that it gets deflected. The closer you get to the center of the atom, the more that beam gets deflected. Well, then what was the conclusion? Well, we know that like charges repel, opposite charges attract. So he basically proved, and if you're not following everything I'm saying here, that's fine. But what Rutherford proved was that all of the positive charges in the atom are condensed in the center. Well, then this led to the development of a new model. Niels Bohr's model, the atom, says that there's a nucleus. The nucleus is where the protons and neutrons are, and then the electrons go around the nucleus in orbits. And this is what we're used to seeing in terms of a drawing of an atom. You have like a little dot that represents, like a big dot that represents the nucleus. And then you've got these little things going around in like ellipses around the center, which are the electrons. Well, this constituted a paradigm shift. And Kuhn talked about how do these paradigm shifts take place. Okay, so remind me again what your point was about that, because I don't want to go through the whole book and all of its themes. We can kind of pack this little by little. So remind me of what your point was, and then I'll tie into that and respond.
When we see those shifts between paradigms, like Newtonian physics is perfectly logical in itself. There's no logical inconsistencies here. But once you start taking that as a system to explain all natural phenomena, it breaks down and it becomes incoherent because it cannot explain all. It can't do quantum mechanics.
Right.
So where that's the gap that I'm pointing at is like there is this inconsistency, even though as a system it's coherent. Once you start applying it into the wider context of the real or all of reality, that gap between the system and reality is like what we aim for as truth seekers, right? Where does this break down?
Yes.
And we can make new paradigms and then break those down. And it's a system of critique, essentially.
Okay. So basically, so coming back to, let's use the models of the atom. Well, since the time of Niels Bohr, I mean, now we know that electrons have subparticles, and some of those subparticles have subparticles. There are some people saying, does it have a bottom? Are we ever going to, how could we ever know that we've hit the bottom of reality, of what like the most basic particle is? Like the word atom, from the Greek, it meant indivisible. So it's something that can't be divided. Well, now we know you can divide that. And then even those particles sometimes can be divided in multiple layers, or at least that's my understanding of it. Okay. It's been a long time since I studied physics. And I know they've learned a lot in the past 40 years. Well, let me circle back. Okay. So here's my response to what you're saying, Isaac. I agree. So here's the point, ladies and gentlemen. No matter how we characterize the world, we can't assume, on one side, we can't assume that this way of explaining the world somehow accounts for everything, because there are always going to be these, there's going to be the boundaries of at least what we can understand or what we've been able to observe. Okay. And so we know that every model that we use is going to break down at some point. And so the model itself is like our way of picturing reality, but it's not reality itself, which is broader and deeper than our models of it. Am I saying that correctly, Isaac?
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I do think that there is probably a model that can account for all of reality. I don't think it's a bottomless pit of, oh, well, it's always just a mystery.
So you're an optimist in the unified theory.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, Einstein was looking for one, and there have been others. Not sure. I'm trying to remember if Stephen Hawking was still optimistic about that or gave up on the notion, but
I mean, I think if you have the premise of the universe generally follows rules of logic, there has to be a unified theory.
Well, that's okay. So that's true. Okay. Now now here's my concern, and everything you said, I agree with, but here's where I would want to say, counter this at a certain point. So this would be my question. So at what point, so if we say, yes, we can't explain everything, but then a lot of people will take that as license then to just go ahead, embrace all kinds of things that don't make sense, even at like, a common level. Like what we experience here from our framework on Earth. So in other words, if you acknowledge that science is based on theory and theories all have their limits, and we all know this, but then some people take that as license then to not even trust the theory. So what would be your response to that? I know how I'm going to respond, but let me hear what you have to say first.
That's where I think the element of belief that is sometimes intentional miscommunication comes into play, because we find greater utility if our beliefs aren't tied down to reality, that they can serve us in ways that we would prefer.
Well, that's true.
Even if we're not aware that we're doing that, there are social pressures to, well, this is an easy explanation for why my beliefs don't have to be consistent with reality.
See, this is again, so I used Isaac Newton's physics as an example. Isaac Newton's way of explaining the world, it's still a reliable way of explaining the world within certain limitations. What people have to keep in mind is that even though Newton's laws break down at a certain point, how many of us there would be very few of us that would ever experience anything that would be beyond the realm of where Newton's laws are going to break down. And see, this is where, people will take like one counterexample, and then somehow they want to destroy a whole paradigm, which is, or a model, which has been helpful. So let's say you have the one child or a few children that do have some kind of a reaction to a vaccine. So does that give license to all the other parents and say, oh no, I don't want that happening to my kid. So here's the thing, folks, when we're making sense of the world and we use these models, it's a matter of percentages. I remember, so my mother had multiple myeloma. She passed away from that a couple years ago. She fought it for 20 years. But even before she was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, she used to worry herself to death. Like when she would have some kind of an ache or pain. I wouldn't say mom was a hypochondriac, but she got about as close as you could get without like imagining you have things that you don't have. But like when she would have an ache or a pain, she'd get out her medical book and then look up and see, well, it could be this, it could be this, could be this. Doctor prescribed her a new medication. She'd be like reading all the warnings on it. Well, see, every single one of these, it's like a matter of percentages. Let's say they test a new drug. You're taking some kind of medication for your blood pressure or whatever. There's going to be a certain percentage of people that are going to have some kind of reaction to it. But just because that happens doesn't mean necessarily that the drug isn't worth having and that nobody should take it. Life is a matter of calculated risks. Now, what some people do is they will just throw caution to the wind, and they don't want to follow, like they want to kind of pick and choose their own paradigms to follow, their own belief system to follow. So let's say, like that couple in Wisconsin that wouldn't take their diabetic daughter to the doctor because they were sure that God would heal her if they had enough faith. Well, you're basically you're rejecting not only the paradigm of science, but you're even rejecting a whole bunch of different paradigms of Christianity about how it's not necessarily a lack of faith in God to go to the doctor. Okay. But they rejected all that for whatever reason, because they had some kind of stock in, I don't know. I mean, there's all kinds of different reasons that people have for wanting to abandon what's tried and true.
I want to just add that I think that it's really easy, especially, when we're talking about philosophy and stuff, to point to some of these completely like untethered from reality belief systems that most people would be like, well, yeah, of course that's ridiculous. And just like, that would be the end of the analysis. I think it's more challenging and more insightful to say, well, there's a human element to belief that all of us have in common. So where do we see ourselves in those people with completely untethered beliefs? Like, what does that tell us about humanity in general in how we form and shape our worldview? And how do we see that in ourselves?
Well, and that's what a lot of people don't want to acknowledge, that we are largely shaped by the experiences that we've had, by the way we've been raised. If I'd been born in a different part of the world, I would probably, even if I ended up with the same beliefs I have now, I would have those beliefs for different reasons. This is kind of what H. Richard Niebuhr said that, he said, he made a comment in one of his books that if I were to ever be an atheist, I would be a Christian atheist. Like, in other words, like if I became an atheist, my reasons for being an atheist would be different from somebody who grew up in an agnostic family and was an atheist. And so we have like these subjective reasons. So it's like, all right, let's use a really simple but subtle illustration. I know, like, it's in my best interest to lose weight. Okay, because a lot of my health issues are caused by being overweight. I put on the weight whenever I went back to grad school. When I went back to grad school and went into teaching, except for standing and lecturing, the rest of the time I'm sitting at a desk. I really need to make more of an effort, just go out and walk a few miles each day, maybe an hour a day or something. I don't know. But here's the thing. I have to decide between whether I want the pleasures of eating that bowl of ice cream, or and every time I indulge in the pleasures of eating a bowl of ice cream, I'm rolling the dice on my health. And we do this, a lot of it, we all do this in very subtle ways. Like there are things that we just enjoy or make us feel good. Like some people just believe certain things because they want to believe something different than what everybody else believes because it somehow validates them and makes them feel competent. Like I know something that other people don't know. And they don't want to see that, like, you somehow think that different is good. Sometimes different is good. Sometimes different is foolish. And so when you start to evaluate your beliefs, you really can't do an adequate job of it. This is something I didn't understand until I was in my 30s. When I was a teenager and in my 20s, I thought that, we could just kind of reason everything and kind of, like I say, Mr. Spock, and just kind of lay out the evidence and we'll all kind of arrive at the truth and it'll be obvious. Well, there are so many things that are open to interpretation, and even the things that we find reliable, we know are not 100% reliable. It's like when you get in your car and drive, nobody knows that you have a 100% guarantee that your car's not going to break down at some point. You could drive a car off the lot and there still might be a very, very small chance that something didn't get assembled properly and something could go wrong with it on the way home. It may be a small chance, but it's still some kind of a chance. Well, what ends up happening because of whatever pleasure people are getting out of their beliefs, sometimes when we get addicted to that pleasure or whatever it is, a feeling of security, feeling of importance, it's all different types of pleasure. Okay. But whatever it is we're getting out of those beliefs, if you start getting like addicted to that particular pleasure, then you start actually working against your own reasoning. And you start rolling the dice more and more by rejecting things that are tried and true.
Yeah, I think we're easily swayed by the temptation to simplify and chase our worldview for pleasure. That like whatever makes us feel important or a sense of belonging, even if that's I belong to a countercultural movement, like whatever it is, we're very easily tempted by that because of our nature as social animals.
Yeah. So our belief, the beliefs that we hold, I want you to say something about that. So like I've commented on some of the, like we have pragmatic reasons for believing what we believe, psychological reasons for believing what we believe. What are some of the sociological reasons? I mean, there's like group identity. I mean, this is how like cults and little groups form.
Yes.
Go ahead.
A lot of it comes down to our need to like a lot of our belief-oriented communities are coherent because of the dehumanization of people who do not believe the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's what I would like to strongly push against when we start talking about people who have vastly different beliefs than us, is like, we're all really the same in our tendency to seek pleasure in creating a worldview. And that oftentimes can lead us to say, like, oh, these, let's take a group that I think gets a lot of, they catch a lot of flack from mainstream Christianity, the Mormon Church. Like, oh, we love to make fun of them for believing they get a planet after they die, right? And they all become gods.
Plus all the wives,
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of things that I've heard that are just like aimed at ridiculing Mormons, and maybe they deserve it. But I want to acknowledge.
Well, you know what Brigham Young said? The plural of spouse is spice. Like mouse and mice, Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And what's the spice of life? Maybe, and I think certain beliefs I think all beliefs really can be ridiculed and be funny. I think everyone's on the cutting board for being made fun of. However, I want to acknowledge that we all have the same structure of belief because we're all humans.
Mm-hmm.
We all have that tendency. We all,
right.
There's a little bit of human belief in all of us. And those human beliefs are largely shaped by the structure of society that we don't really get to have a say in. So to a certain extent, the way we form beliefs is out of our control.
Unless you want to be an asocial person and just not have any friends and be a hermit. But there are very few people that can really function that way.
But even that might be an outcome of how human societies naturally, and I'm not talking about like, oh, well, the systems. I'm talking about like at an almost animal primate level, how we relate to each other in terms of, I see you have that, I want that. Like those really basic instincts that form the shapes of how we build larger systems of society and relating to each other. Even those really basic instinctual levels shape how we believe. Right? Because we're seeking security from those sort of violent tendencies that are at the basic level of how we relate to each other.
Yes. So, yeah, I mean, and that's kind of the thing. So let's distill this down a little bit again. So folks, like in a simplified way, here's the thing, like to a certain extent, our beliefs are, I don't want to say determined, but it's largely driven by like group identification and socialization patterns. Like we decide, okay, so here's a good example. Somebody goes to, they try out a new church, or they get invited to attend the local luncheon of the Rotary Club or whatever it may be. Okay. Or get a gym membership or whatever. When you enter a new circle, it's like if you don't fit in well, like this is what is interesting. People would say, oh no, my beliefs aren't really determined by other people. But I'll guarantee you, say just like even say like religious beliefs, people go to a church or a synagogue or a mosque, and if they don't like the people that are there, they're going to go find some place that they do like the people first, and then they will gradually adapt their beliefs to fit in with the group. We know this because like people know, like if you're going to build your congregation up, well, you have to be the kind of place where people feel welcomed and they feel loved and appreciated, because that's like the big thing. It's not that people develop all these views and say, okay, now I'm going to shop around and find where's the place that everybody believes and thinks the way that I do. I mean, we may start that way, but if you don't like the people that you're with, you'll start to change. I mean, we know this as parents. How many parents go through the terror of wondering who your kids are chumming around with in high school? Because we know that at a certain level, we all want to feel like we belong. And it's like, that isn't open to interpretation. So, maybe I could, kind of adopt this into my life so I can fit into the group. I mean, there are naturally some personalities in the group that are more dominant than others. And so they may have more control over what everybody's going to believe in common. But this is like nothing new. I don't know. You have any other thoughts to add to this?
I have an interesting example. So our socioeconomic location sometimes can determine what we believe, and I think it's largely driven by that pleasure that we gain from meaning making. Like, if you're in a socioeconomic location in society where life is miserable and you struggle to come up with a reason to keep going on, you are much, much more likely to believe in things that give you a supernatural interpretation of meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, a belief in hell as a place of eternal punishment and heaven as a place of eternal reward, much, much more common in teenagers who are extremely poor. And when analyzed, and I'll have to pull up the study, and there will be a link to this study in our show notes if you want to, check my homework. But
you don't think that teenagers' belief in hell is tied to having to go through junior high school or middle school? I mean, I was one of the best. Junior high was like the best argument for the existence of hell that I could think of as a
junior
young person.
Junior high is hell.
Yeah, it is kind of. But okay,
but,
I'm sorry.
It's not
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just had to throw that in there.
Oh no, I agree. But so if you're extremely poor, you're more likely to believe in the afterlife version of heaven and hell.
Right. There's a place of retribution.
Largely because you have no pleasure in life.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be something that makes your existence worth having, right? Your life worth living. Something has to set the scales back to correct. Like some justice has to be done, and they don't see any justice being done in the world. So they have to project justice into a supernatural realm.
Well, this was exactly the philosopher Immanuel Kant's argument for religious belief. Like he thought that if there is such a thing as morality, if anything makes any difference at all, well, then there would have to be an afterlife because virtue is not properly rewarded in this life. And you even see this in the New Testament. Didn't St. Paul say, if only in this life I have hope, in Christ I am of all men most miserable? And that's a lot different than the people that say, being a believer is the happiest way to live and this and that. Well, we've kind of people tend to make faith more hedonistic over time. But a lot of times these religious movements are started by countercultural movements of people who are standing against the system. And so they are basically saying, this is what Jesus is saying in the Gospels. Don't follow the scribes and Pharisees. They're leading you astray. If the blind lead the blind, you both end up in a ditch. the last shall be first, the first shall be last. And, so it takes a long time before we end up like with the Joel Osteens out there who act like, hey man, you live for God and you'll just have everything you need here. Plus you get heaven thrown in. And a lot of the world's religions started with these kind of ascetic movements where it was by, like you say, the have-nots. And so they're saying, all you people who have the things that we don't have, there's an afterlife where this is all going to get straightened out.
Right. Yeah. I will say, just to clarify, the study I'm talking about was not just Christians.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it was across the board that if you're poor, you're much, much more likely to believe in an afterlife of retribution than if you are wealthy.
I've talked about this. So in world religions, so Jainism is the religion that influenced Mahatma Gandhi a good bit because of their emphasis on nonviolence. But what's interesting about Jainism is Mahavira, the guy who started it, like he basically preached like total renunciation of this world. So like the legends about him were that he even would like walk around naked and stand like a statue because he was focusing on the spiritual realm and not paying attention to what was going on in this world. Well, Jainism has this view of like there are like 14 stages of purity in this world that you go through to be able to get to heaven. And then like heaven has numerous levels and hell has like 7 levels. And they had this whole, it's kind of like an expansion of kind of like the Hindu caste system to a certain extent. And what's funny is they're monks. You have Digambra and Shvetambra Jains. And the monks basically take these like vows of renunciation and like live in absolute poverty. But over time, the Jains are the most wealthy religious group in India now. And people have a way of like these movements are countercultural when they start. And over time, people want to somehow transform the religion so they can have the best of both worlds. And it happens again and again. So anyway, yeah, I mean, this is where we want to be independent thinkers, but yet to a certain extent, if you try to be an absolutely independent thinker, you could end up being a very lonely thinker. And that was one of the things that happened with Kierkegaard. Okay, so Kierkegaard, he didn't want to, he was trying to play, like his hero was Socrates. Well, we saw what happened to Socrates. And Kierkegaard ended up being like a social outcast. And then he just kind of got more and more hurt and bitter against the establishment as he went. And yeah. And another philosopher that kind of fell into that same pitfall was Schopenhauer, Arthur Schopenhauer, who he was the philosopher basically had all of his dogs and said that dogs were better than people.
Yeah. Yeah. And similar story with Nietzsche towards the end of his life.
Exactly. But here's what the point I was going to make is, here's the thing. There has to be a balance between thinking for yourself, being willing to be different, but also we have to recognize we have social needs and we are going to want to fit in with a group. But that's why it becomes more and more important in life that we choose our friends and our circles of associates wisely. people that are going to help us. So here's the thing. We circle back around this a couple times, and maybe we can kind of circle back to this as a good landing spot. But talking about being connected with reality, okay, or disconnected from reality. We all take certain risks, okay, playing the percentages and this and that. It starts like every one of us has some kind of an incentive to face reality, okay? But some people like push this off as far as they can because maybe facing reality is some kind of something, it includes something that they don't want to face. You know, like somebody who is diagnosed with some kind of a terminal cancer. You know, pancreatic cancer is like one of the worst ones that, you know, that would be something that would be horrifying to find out you had. But, you know, at some point, it's foolish if we lose that center of balance. I want to say, I don't want to say that we should always try to be objective no matter what and never take any chances for social or personal reasons. But you got to, at some point, be tethered so that you don't let yourself get so drawn in. Like, there are some people that they just believe certain things because it, again, they're getting some kind of a kick in somehow feeling like somehow this belief validates them and their self-esteem gets tied into that belief. And so how are you going to talk somebody out of that kind of belief, especially if it's a harmful belief? Like people get involved in cults and things like that.
Yeah, I think this actually kind of brings us nicely full circle back to the beginning.
Yes.
Debate, what the role of debate is.
Yes. Yes.
I think it's important to engage in debate because that's how we relate to people that have different beliefs than us. And the presence of debate in a friendship or in a community is a sign of its health because it means you can hold two different beliefs. And I think it's important to know what you believe and stand for what you believe. You know, the old saying, you gotta stand for something or you'll fall for anything.
Yes, yes.
However, if you can't debate someone, to me, that means you've dehumanized them because of their beliefs. Regardless of how far out there they might be. And there might be a limit to that in terms of how harmful a belief can be that you would engage in. You know, there are fairly harmful beliefs that I think are just not worth debating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But at an individual level or a small community level, the presence of debate, I think, is a good indicator of the health of that community.
Absolutely.
Because it means you can have non-uniformity and still see each other as people.
Right. Right.
And I think we've, as a culture, we've become so afraid of conflict that we just, anybody who disagrees with us it's not, the people who are afraid of conflict think, oh man, any debate and you're like being mean or people are going to get their feelings hurt. No, to me, it hurts my feelings when people are not willing to debate.
Yeah.
Because that means you don't even see me as worthy of conflict.
Well, yeah. And you can have conflict and debate without being hateful or hostile.
Right. Yeah. It's respectful.
Right. See, ladies and gentlemen, whether we want to admit it or not, we need each other. I mean, what keeps me centered is the people who are willing to stand up and say, I'm not sure I quite agree with that. And that makes me rethink things. And I do the same thing for them. It's like iron sharpens iron. Okay. And that is what we need. We don't need pockets of people who just all come together like a bunch of lemmings and keep saying the same things over and over to each other and somehow think that, well, we're right and we're going to impose our views on everybody else. We need to get back to civil discourse. That is what leads to societal development and growth and progress. You have to hear, everybody has their own concerns. Everybody has their own set of experiences. We have to be willing to listen to the other person's side, and that goes both directions. Okay? Whether you're on the right or the left, or whether you're from the country or the city, no matter what your skin color is or what your religious beliefs are, we need other people and we need other voices to keep us tethered so that we don't get caught up in our own little bubble of pleasure and get to the point where of no return. It's sad when we see people that get so far that they're not going to change because in their minds, it would mean like a complete, like it would be completely humiliating or like a renunciation of their self or something like that. And that's sad to see. That's sad to see happen. When people start defining themselves by their beliefs, I think we cease to be our whole selves. I mean, my beliefs reflect who I am, but I like to think that I'm more than that, and that if I'm going to be my full self, I have to be willing to grow in my beliefs.
Yes, we need each other to the beginning of it is affirming the humanity of those who disagree with us.
Yes.
But then also, in ourselves, we need people who disagree with us to point us towards those things that can drive paradigm shifts. People who can point out the inconsistencies or the lack of coherency that will push us towards truth. We have to have people who with different perspectives to have those paradigm shifts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, before we wrap it up, was there anything else that that you wanted to discuss, Isaac, that we didn't get to?
I think we've made a full circle.
Or that won't wait for another episode, I should say.
No, I don't think so. We've definitely left some things on the table that I think, well, that's going to be a whole episode.
Yeah. And okay. So for those of you listening, don't get, if this part of this got kind of deep pretty quickly, don't let that scare you off. We're not going to have necessarily, we don't want to just have shallow
this
conversations.
This isn't just a dry philosophy podcast.
Well, we don't want it so that you're, having to kind of like listen to it 5 seconds at 10 seconds at a time and process it either. But thanks for sticking it out with us. We really do appreciate it. If you're interested in this topic, I'm going to make a shameless plug for my first book that I wrote back in 2008, or published in 2008. It's called The Maturity of Belief. And I get into talking about, in a more basic way, the different dynamics of why we believe what we believe and what does it mean to be mature in one's thinking, especially when it comes to religious belief. And that's what the focus of the book is. So you can find that Amazon and other booksellers. So I'd be thrilled and honored if you want to give it a read, and leave a review too. But we really enjoyed our time here today, and we will occasionally, there's still some other issues here, and we're going to keep coming back to some of these topics as well. But I like variety, so we keep it mixed up, and we'll be back into another hot topic for you here next week. And we appreciate you sticking it out with us. Isaac, you want to remind everybody about our how to get in touch with us and all that?
Yeah. if you would like to send us any topic suggestions, questions, you can email us at thehappycynics@gmail.com. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts. If you rate us and leave a review, you can ask us a question in there. We read all of our reviews, so that's a good way to get in touch with us.
And we're still expanding. I'm planning at least a Facebook account for us. And we'll probably consider some other places too. So, yeah,
as our sites go up, we'll keep you updated. I'm sure we'll have a functioning website soon. I know we have a URL. So
yes, absolutely.
It's not been updated, so don't go there yet. But probably by the time this episode is up, we'll have content there. So go ahead and
give it a try.
There.
Give it a try.
Thanks for listening. It's been a pleasure.
We hope you all have a great week. We'd love to hear from you, but you all take care and God bless.